Dragon Age is a game that a lot of people have been keeping an eye on for a while, and there are multifaceted reasons for it, okay? For one, this is coming from a previously very highly respected studio, BioWare. BioWare, however, in case you're maybe a little younger, you don't remember, BioWare has had a couple of big old swings and misses. They had Project Dylan, which eventually became Anthem, and that was pretty poopy. So that game, in some ways, it was ahead of its time. It was a live service game that was just lacking in content completely. So maybe it was ahead of its time. But Anthem didn't really go anywhere. It was just a big old flop, unfortunately. And prior to that, they had a game in 2017 in a very popular franchise, Mass Effect, with Mass Effect Andromeda. And that game was so broken at launch, also sort of ahead of its time, that it became a meme that whole year. It was a total disaster. So they had like 2 back-to-back colossal flops. Yeah, the famous meme from it was, "My face is tired," where you're talking to one of the NPCs and she's like, the dialogue was unbelievable. She's like, "My face is tired." And then they tried to come out and be like, "No, the subtitles were wrong. It's actually 'My faith is tired.'" I'm like, it still sounds like face, not faith. Maybe she has like a lisp. I don't know, but it didn't sound like faith at all. Or like an inverse lisp. Is that a thing where like instead of saying TH on your S's, you say an S where THs should be? I don't think that's a thing, but anyway, either way, it doesn't make sense. Exactly, Doom. It doesn't make sense either way, because either it's your faith is tired, which doesn't really make sense, or your face is tired, which makes sense, but also it's just not how humans talk. So the whole thing was weird. But anyway, there's been a lot of eyes on them for a while because people are still hoping, maybe, just maybe, they can figure it out. Maybe they come back swinging with Dragon Age Inquisition, or Freudian slip, Dragon Age Dreadwolf, and they blow us all away and they actually get back, on the horse and show us how it's done. Because there was always a little bit of cope going on with some of these games, where sometimes people were like, no, the only reason that BioWare screwed up Anthem and Dragon Age, Mass Effect Andromeda, was because they were forced to use the EA official engine of choice, which was Frostbite, I believe. I always get Frostbite and Snowdrop mixed up, but I think Snowdrop is the Ubisoft one. So I think it was Frostbite. But they were forced to use the Frostbite engine, which was an engine developed primarily for like Battlefield and shooters and stuff. And they were forced to use it for Mass Effect Andromeda, and it just didn't work well. It's an engine that's not built on like RPG systems. It's just not. And so when you tried to make a game like that, it didn't work. The whole thing just kind of fell apart. And so people tried to blame like EA corporate for it, but then like Anthem came and it's like, okay, this is getting harder to excuse. Like it's back to back. They're still using it. Like my hope would be after all these years, if they're still using EA tools and stuff, that they have found ways to maybe fix it and improve it, but I don't know. Is there official confirmation? What engine does Dreadwolf use? Yeah, it does say they're using the Frostbite engine again. So hopefully they've just made enough improvements that it's improved. This post on Reddit from 4 years ago says they're using Anthem's code base on the Frostbite engine. So unlike Dragon Age Inquisition, Mass Effect Andromeda, and Anthem, they're not starting from scratch and have an RPG story progression physics systems already built in to build off of, worth noting in this case. So they're in a better starting spot than they were with those games, but it still is a little worrisome, right? Now, maybe they get all the tech issues fixed. They get all that figured out. And maybe let's just assume technology is not the issue here. Okay. It's not really a concern. They can focus purely on the mechanics, on the story and things like that. They are fighting an uphill battle here. And they're fighting an uphill battle in a couple of ways. For one, they have hemorrhaged a lot of talent. What happens when you have a flop is that nobody wants to work for you. Like, and it makes sense. If you ask yourself, like, you get out of college, or maybe you're leaving one studio and you're looking for a new job, would you want to go and work with the company that released Game of the Year last year, or has released some amazing games that you know and love in the last decade? Or do you want to go work for the team that has had 2 back-to-back colossal flops? You probably don't want to work for the company that makes the flops. even if you grew up liking their games and stuff, you probably want to go where exactly you want to go ride the horse that has won the races, not the one that can't figure out how to gallop, right? It only makes sense, right? So with that having been said, they've hemorrhaged a bit of talent over the years where a lot of people have left to go work at other companies, which is very normal. A lot of people in the game development industry bounce around from team to team. Like, it's pretty rare nowadays, as far as I can tell, to stay at one studio for years. I mean, it's well, for like decades. Okay. It's common to work on a game, but it's not that common to work on a team for like 20, 30 years. That's why like Bethesda Game Studios is so exceptional in a lot of ways. Same with Naughty Dog, because they have a lot of people at those studios that have been there for ages and have worked on many games together. And that camaraderie, that shared experience, and that knowledge and friendship can lead to some really interesting collaborative situations where people are able to work really well together. And Dragon Age and their developers have not had that because they've had 2 back-to-back flops. I mean, they have not had a successful game since 2014, which at this point is a decade ago. Now, bear in mind, other studios take a decade to make a game and they come out swinging and they do a great job. Other studios, they might take 10 years to make a game and it turns into Suicide Squad. So you just never really know how it's going to play out. But when you're talking about talent, that's a big consideration because talent makes games. It's not the engine. It's not the above the door. It's the people within the studio that make the games. And my biggest concern for BioWare is that they don't have the same talent base that they had back in 2014. A lot of those people have moved on to go other places. Still could be successful, still could be awesome, but it's not the same company it was. In addition to all of this, and perhaps the biggest hurdle for them to overcome, the elephant in the room, Baldur's Gate. Baldur's Gate is going to be the albatross around many fantasy games necks for the next decade. Everybody's going to be comparing every fantasy RPG to it nonstop. It's going to be, I mean, it is the new standard. It just is. And that doesn't mean that like Dragon Age Dreadwolf is going to be bad, but I do think whenever anybody's talking about Dragon Age, it's going to be, okay, but does it do this like Baldur's Gate? Okay, that's cool, but does it do this like Baldur's Gate? Does it have this like Baldur's Gate? How does it handle consequences in decisions like Baldur's Gate? That's going to constantly be brought up time and time again. Okay, so just be ready for it. And it's good on the one hand because it raises the standard. It demands better from these companies because Baldur's Gate 3 was exceptionally good in many ways. It was an exceptional game. It was different than the standard. And that's good because it pushes the industry forward. But it's also very tough for other studios because they are not Larian. They might not have had the same budget as Larian. So it's going to be tough to live up to that standard. It's going to be difficult to live up to that. So a lot of eyes are on them. But there are reasons to think that they might actually find a bit of success from this. We're hopeful. Okay. So this is an article from Game Rant, and this is just a breakdown of their development process as they've worked on it. It's set to receive a full reveal later this year, and it's even expected to launch this year, which is crazy. It's expected still to release later this year, potentially in the fall or winter. Doesn't mean it's a guarantee, could slip, but right now they expect it to release later this year. So it's much further along than we might have thought. A lot of people are like, well, we haven't really seen a lot of gameplay or reveals or anything. Not many people are talking about it, so it's probably still a ways off. Apparently it's pretty damn close. Apparently they're wrapping it up and they're getting ready to do some big reveals. So I think this summer we're going to see a lot about it. They say the highlights. Development has been tumultuous, with various iterations and changes over a decade. From a live service project to a single player sequel, Dragon Age Dreadwolf has seen diverse shifts. That's concerning. It was a live service project for a while. Oof. After a challenging development process, BioWare's future success may hinge on the reception of, or to what will supposedly be an action-heavy experience in Dreadwolf. Interesting. They say, It's the fourth entry in their popular RPG franchise. Sure is, baby. Across with multiple iterations of the same project that were canceled and reimagined, BioWare has gone through a long development cycle that will hopefully pay off when Dreadwolf finally arrives. While the CRPG style of Dragon Age Origins first established the IP as something akin to a spiritual successor to BioWare's Baldur's Gate. That's right, they're the OGs. Subsequent entries diverged from the genre in ways that have caused fundamental design changes unique to each Dragon Age title. Dragon Age 2 took a controversial plunge into more of an action RPG style at the expense of customization and tactical combat, while Inquisition further expanded the series' identity with its focus on semi-open world. Considering leaks and official sources regarding the state of Dreadwolf's most recent incarnation, almost said incantation. It seems that the fourth Dragon Age will continue this trend of featuring a new style, which will be the culmination of several scrapped attempts at the project. I mean, whenever I hear that there's been multiple iterations, including an iteration that was a live service game, that gets me worried. But, because every time that a game is worked on, and then there's a pivot and a pivot and a pivot, remnants of the original things still remain. Very rarely are companies starting from absolute scratch. And you can tell that in Suicide Squad. You can tell that in something like Skull and Bones, where you feel like there's multiple games at the core of it that are still holding over. It's interesting because you can always see, oh, I bet that's from when the game was like this. Oh yeah, I bet that's when the game was like this, and then they changed it, but they kept that part. It's kind of cool because you can see those threads carry through. But it also worries me because I don't want a Dragon Age that's a live service game, and I don't think anybody else does either. So, the original version of Dreadwolf, prior to the development hell which followed, BioWare was initially working on a follow-up to the events of Inquisition's Solus-centric Trespasser DLC, which began production in 2015. Project Joplin was set to be a sequel that Dragon Age fans had come to expect, a single-player, story-centric experience which could have potentially recaptured the appreciation Origins received. This game would have allegedly focused on a smaller zone with more tailored content in a manner that could have reflected the studio's CRPG days. But this project wouldn't make it to release. Dun dun dun! 2 years were dated. I can't read. 2 years were dedicated to Project Joplin. From around the time of Trespasser's release in 2015 to late 2017, the fourth Dragon Age was developed within an atmosphere that was apparently one of the most positive that some at BioWare had experienced. Despite this, the financial circumstances of the studio under EA led to a change so significant that it marked the end of the Project Joplin version of Dreadwolf. It's unknown if assets or work from this project, or rather from this time period, are even being utilized now, but what came next was a detour which lasted another several years. The canceled live service of Project Morrison. Oh, EA. Oh, EA. A shift away from Dragon Age's single-player focus. It initially seemed that the sequel to Inquisition was going to lean back into what Origins first established, but 2017 instead brought about the transition into a fully monetized live service title, expanding on the smaller multiplayer component of the third game. Project Morrison was a full-force effort to bring the Dragon Age series into a genre which its fans had little to do with. The studio announced its heavy focus on reactive storytelling that would exist within a constantly updated world, but this production was ultimately failed, but this production also ultimately failed to yield a final product by the time of 2021. So they worked on this for like 3-4 years as a live service game and then decided to can it once again. They changed their mind once again, reverting Project Morrison's changes over the 3 years. While it was teased over the course of its development and even in the months leading up to its cancellation, the production of Project Morrison's live service Dragon Age basically came to an end during early 2021 when the decision was made to move the game back towards a single player direction. Some fans may find it confusing that Dreadwolf has gone through such a sporadic and unpredictable production cycle before eventually landing on a definitive style, but the reality of its developer circumstances through the past few years explains why creating Dreadwolf has been anything but an easy process. Sure enough, they've had some troubles. It might not have been the studio's most unanimously well-received game upon release, but Inquisition set the record for BioWare's biggest launch in terms of sales. The studio was known for some of the most popular RPGs through the 2000s and beyond, but its legacy would falter when 2017's Andromeda launched to general criticisms that was unprecedented for its franchise. the upcoming Dragon Age would be changed into a live service title alongside Anthem at that time, possibly a reaction to Andromeda's mixed reception. When Anthem went on to fall below expectations, however, it may have set the tone for the current single-player iteration of Dreadwolf alongside changes in the team. This also really worries me, though, because the people that are good at live service games are good at live service games. They're not single player devs. They're not RPG devs. Like, it's just a different talent set. And we've learned that over the last few years, as we've seen so many of these studios that specialize in single player stuff try to make live service stuff. They're not always the best at it. And when they specialize in live service stuff and they try to go single player, there's also some learning or rather kind of growing pains that go along with it. Because again, the games are made by people, not by the studio. So if you bring in live service devs to make a live service Dragon Age game, that's what they're good at. If you try to pivot once again into a single player thing, that's not necessarily what they're good at. It's going to take some time and some effort to kind of refigure or reconfigure your production process. Beyond that, when you're going from single player to live service to single player, you went from live service where you had a team of world-class talent. You go to live service, a lot of them are frustrated. They don't want to work on live service, so they leave and they go work on single player stuff elsewhere. But then you flip back to single player, so then the live service guys are frustrated because they make live service games. They specialize in networking and all this stuff, so they pivot back and they leave and you have to rehire stuff. So you just end up with extremely high turnover for really no reason, just because you couldn't make up your mind. And this is one of the problems with Ubisoft. It's one of the problems with EA, is that they're constantly chasing waves instead of making their own. Say what you will about Larian. Larian made their own damn wave. They basically made a tsunami with Baldur's Gate 3, doubling down on what they knew they were good at. And they did such a good job, it created a tidal wave. And all of these other companies like EA, like Ubisoft, they just look for the waves. They try to spot them coming from a distance and then ride them into the shore. And that can sometimes work. I mean, sometimes you can do that and it times out great and it's well executed and you make a ton of money and you're happy with it. But you'd be much better off just making your own waves, making really good games that make those waves by themselves. It's just, unfortunately, for whatever reason, Ubisoft and EA especially, they don't seem to understand that. And so they just try to trend chase, and you end up with games that are really out of date by the time you get them, because they make a choice to like chase a live service trend in 2017 and be like, oh, we can do Destiny. We can just do what Destiny's doing, or we can just do what Fortnite or PUBG or whatever is doing. Let's just do that, but with Dragon Age. And then by the time we get it, it's 5, 6, 7 years later, and it's woefully out of date. Nobody's interested in it anymore because they tried to ride a wave that already broke on shore, right? It just doesn't really work that way. And so they pivoted back. The loss of key BioWare staff. Yeah, this is the crucial thing. The development hell of Dreadwolf has spanned around 10 years, and this time period has proven to be one of the most challenging in BioWare's history. General manager Aaron Flynn would depart before longtime creative director Mark Laidlow did the same back in 2017. But this was just the beginning. James Olin, a prolific designer of the studio and one of its first members, left in 2018 and took his experience with him. Replacement GM Casey Hudson and executive producer Mark Dara did the same in 2020 before around 50 layoffs hit BioWare in 2023 and cut several veteran employees. It makes sense that the project has taken so long when noting this context, but it might finally materialize this year. I mean, again, it's really tough to make a world-class game when your world-class talent is either leaving or being fired. It's shocker. It's quite difficult, dare I say. For 2023's Dragon Age Day event that took place in December, BioWare unveiled a trailer for Dreadwolf, which showed off parts of Thedas that the player seems set to explore. This was the most concrete footage of the project released yet, and it came with the announcement of further reveal later this summer. It's unknown when the full title will end up launching, but the build-up of nearly a decade of production with nothing to show for it has some fans anticipating a possible holiday release for Dreadwolf at this rate. That's kind of what I'm expecting. Maybe November. That'd be a safe bet. BioWare's future is likely riding on Dreadwolf's success. Absolutely agree. Given the comparatively lower status of its past few games when compared to its biggest hits, BioWare might be perceived as a studio that has fallen out of favor with many fans at this point. Now comprised of a different team after a multitude of departures, Dreadwolf will be under pressure to prove that its studio still has what it takes to be recognized as a pillar of the RPG genre. It probably won't retain the feeling that Origins originally gave fans, but Dragon Age Dreadwolf's action-centric gameplay still has the chance to strike a balance and receive praise when it does eventually launch. It has a chance, I agree, but the stakes are very, very high, and I think they are... the stakes are super high, expectations are super high, and I wish them the best. I would love for this to pop off and be amazing. I mean, I would love it, but I'm not overly confident. But again, maybe this is also like an asset. Maybe this is a benefit because, again, kind of like Ubisoft with Star Wars Outlaws, maybe it's a net positive because expectations are probably going to be really low for Dragon Age. So if it's half decent, if it's like an 8 or a 9 out of 10, which that's above half decent, but if it's like a 7 to 8 out of 10, and people are expecting like Anthem or Mass Effect Andromeda, it's a pleasant surprise. And people are like, oh, actually, I'm having a really good time with it. This is awesome. And maybe that's enough for it to be successful and for them to start getting their feet back under them. But there is no doubt BioWare from 2014, that's not the same company that's there now. It's a almost extremely different group of people, or entirely different group of people. It's got a lot of expectations riding on them. I don't know if the studio is shut down if this flops as well. It becomes really hard to argue that they should stay open if this also flops. Like, imagine that this launches and it's a technical disaster. It's unfun. The stories and the writing is terrible. It's just across the board. It's like a 5 out of 10. It's terrible. If it is on that scale of a flop, I don't know how EA justifies keeping them open. I mean, how do you do that? 3 flops back to back. But try again. We'll give it another shot. I just can't imagine they let them stay open. So what you're saying is they sandbagged themselves with Anthem and Andromeda on purpose to help this game. Yeah, it's all part of a grand conspiracy. Yeah. Yeah, I think people will make their minds even before it comes out. And even if the game is good, they will consider it trash. Maybe FCO plays. I mean, I do think that there is an unfortunate trend in the industry right now where people think that just everything has to be a scandal. You know, I think it's because it's fun to watch a dumpster fire. I mean, it's fun to see a game like Saints Row Reboot that looks bad and then is bad and crashes and burns. And sometimes I think it can turn the community into a hammer in search of a nail. That sometimes hits a nail, but also sometimes it just starts breaking stuff and smashing stuff that didn't need to be broken. But at the core, I mean, most good games, as long as they don't give ammunition to people that, like, you know, ammunition for things that are bad, there's nothing really to complain about. Like, if you just put out a good game, it'll kind of just speak for itself. But if you give them ammunition to be upset about, they're going to be upset about it. You know, you can have a really good game like Dragon's Dogma 2, but if you have monetization, if you have terrible PC performance and console performance and stuff, you're delivering a good game, but you also are handing them a bunch of ammunition to attack you with when you just didn't need to do that. Like, if you just didn't do that, you would have been fine. The game would have been overwhelmingly successful. But now all anybody wants to talk about is the dumpster fire parts, you know? So as long as like the game is polished, it runs well, and it's not monetized out the ass, right there, those are the 2 big pieces of ammunition people use to attack these types of games right now when they're present. So as long as they can avoid those 2 things, it's polished, and it's not like super stupid monetized, whatever, then it's just being evaluated as a video game. That's all they're going to be looking at. And if that's the case, then we're set.
He took my thing.